What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and it's Christmas here on Comics Explained, and I wanted to have something to do for Christmas. And so I actually found a story where Doctor Doom became Santa Claus, but it's done in a rhythmic fashion. And so what I did is I grabbed Comic Storian, and the two of us put the audio together, and I'm bringing it to you guys. So it'll be a Superman Rebirth story first, and then the story of Doctor Doom being Santa Claus. So I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Comic Storian and I both loved making it. So yeah, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. All right. So, after a week's worth of Incredible Hulk content, I imagine a lot of you guys are just like tired of the Hulk. And I understand. I mean, I usually try not to blast people with that much of the same content at one time, just because of the fact that it'll drive people crazy. Even I myself was getting a little burned out. And so again, of course, you guys will notice the schedule down in the description, and Hulk is going to be one day a week, just because of the fact that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to cover now that we've kind of missed out on that week with other content. So there's The Walking Dead we're getting caught back up on, which should be out by now. There's all kinds of stuff. There's all different Marvel, and there's classic Marvel and things like that. And also, I'm going to get back into character discussions. As a lot of you guys may have noticed right now, I've been, going through and kind of running over a lot of different things, free flow, and we're going to take that back to character discussions. I just kind of had to get back into the swing of things. But what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be running over the newest story arc for Superman Rebirth, and this is actually really kind of cool. Of course, again, Peter J. Tomasi is writing this, and this story is not wildly important. This is just really one of those things where he's fleshing out Superman's perception of the world, because remember, Superman is still relatively new here. And the pre-New 52 Superman came from the pre-New 52 landscape, and he's suddenly thrust into the New 52. And so he's learning his place in this landscape of superheroes. He's, getting more in tune with the Justice League. I would say Francis Manipoul's Trinity is doing a beautiful job fleshing him out on that score, because that story is incredible. Like, Clay Mann's art is unbelievable. At least the cover art that he did is unbelievable. But this also takes place a little bit before Lois Lane actually goes to the Daily Planet, like we saw in Action Comics. And so what we end up doing here is we actually end up picking up with the editor while they're in Hamilton County, or at least while Lois Lane is in Hamilton County. And it's really kind of cool here, because again, this is just a small time operation. It's not too big, and in truth, this little news agency as it exists here is not a very huge thing. I mean, it's not designed to be the major focus of the story. Instead, it's actually the person who's effectively running the show. And what happens is, in the midst of Lois Lane's conversation with this, they're suddenly met by the arrival of Frankenstein. Now, this is where things get a little interesting, because what we're going to be dealing with here is Shade. Now, Shade is a group that we've never really talked about before, because in truth, I haven't had much of very many conversations about like the different organizations in DC Comics, where Marvel has like SHIELD and SWORD and all that kind of different stuff. DC has a lot of other organizations like Shade. Of course, we know about Suicide Squad, Task Force X, different things like that. It makes for a really cool situation, because it helps to bolster the landscape of DC Comics. And what it tells us is that where we have things like, Justice League Dark, for example, which is like, Constantine and a handful of other people that deal with like sorcery and devilry and those dark aspects, what it also tells us is that DC has the Shade organization as like a Suicide Squad / bounty hunter kind of thing, / Justice League Dark. The biggest force of this, or the biggest brunt of this, is Frankenstein. And what DC did when they launched the New 52 and they more or less rebooted Shade is they had the Frankenstein line of stories. I think it was called Frankenstein Agent of Shade or something like that. But what it did is it basically said, hey, here is this organization as it exists right now. It deals with a lot of supernatural stuff. It deals with a lot of supernatural powered beings, but it doesn't deal with them in the same way Justice League Dark does. Like, they're not going after demons or different things like that. It's just like weird phenomena. So Shade, I wouldn't say, or at least the Frankenstein line of stories, I wouldn't say were wildly popular. In fact, I think they were canceled quick, fast, and in a hurry. But again, it helps to beef things up a bit. Now, of course, Lois Lane being taken prisoner by Frankenstein, or at least being attacked by Frankenstein, begs a few questions. But keep in mind, this is the New 52, and so this version of Frankenstein does not recognize Lois Lane. He doesn't really recognize or at least he won't recognize Superman. And a lot of this is because of the fact that he really had no dealings with him, never really had a reason to. The other half of this is that Frankenstein basically keeps saying that, like, this editor, this woman running the show, is effectively a criminal, and the idea is to take them, to take them into justice. Now, this is why I say that Shade is, at least Frankenstein, as he operates as part of Shade, is kind of like this bounty hunter thing. It's not like he's a rogue agent. It's not like he's, a guy that's like a publicly hireable contractor. He doesn't just advertise out there and people secure his services. Shade is really more of a group where it's like, okay, if there are people who are supernatural, or people who are akin to the Justice League Dark kind of villains, and they've gone out there and they're attacking planets or whatever the case may be, our job is to reel them in and to either hold them so that they can be taken back to where it is they're being charged, whatever planet or solar system it happens to be, or to simply take them into custody if they originate from here. But again, with Lois Lane and this editor kind of taking off, it's really one of these funny situations because it's sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time for Lois Lane. But with Superman showing up and saving the day, this is one of the cool things about Peter J. Tomasi, because back in the day, back in like the 40s, back in the 50s, it was always Superman was always there. Like no matter what happened, Lois Lane could be on the other side of the world and go falling to her death, and Superman would show up. And for the longest time, it was a trope, and it still kind of is. It's still one of these things that people look at and say, oh, it's the Superman complex. This guy is just kind of walking around and like his girlfriend's in distress, and so he's going to go and save her. It's that kind of Superman complex that goes around. But at this point, it's part of the mythology, right? I mean, if there were a story, okay, take Injustice, for example. Injustice is a really good example. The Joker kills Lois Lane by tricking Superman into believing that she's Doomsday. He literally engineers Lois Lane's death at the hands of Superman himself. But we as comic book readers say, okay, that's an extraordinary set of circumstances. That's not the norm. But if Lois Lane is on top of a building and smoking a cigarette, of course she doesn't smoke, but if she's on top of a building and talking to someone or something like that, she takes 2 steps back, she trips and she falls off, and Superman doesn't save her, then we're like, well, what in the heck was Superman doing? Like, what what was he doing that he couldn't save Lois Lane? We expect him to fly in. We expect him to come in and save her life because that's an intrinsic part of who he is. Now, something else I also want you to take note of here is how this Superman handles things. Because again, this is Tomasi saying, this Superman that you're seeing here is the Superman. This is the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths Superman, the one that you grew up with if you've been reading comics for the last 20 or 30 years. The one that you grew up with when you think of Superman. This is the one that you think of. You don't really think of like Golden Age Superman. You think of like the wiser, the more experienced Superman in terms of, pop culture within the last 30 years or so. And so instead of like the New 52 Superman who would have just started fighting Frankenstein and beating him up, and then at the end understand everything, Superman, this pre-New 52 Superman neutralizes Frankenstein and says, okay, let's find out what's going on. And that's just pure experience. That's just experience talking. It's Superman coming to the realization it's not a good idea to hit first and ask questions later. It's a better idea to try to understand what all is going on here, because for Superman, he doesn't know the big picture, but understanding what's taking place is the first step to solving the problem. Now, of course, the Superman is somewhat distracted, by an attack from Frankenstein, and then he just comes across an old man on a farm with a shotgun. Now, this is really, really cool. This is really interesting, and this is one of the reasons why I love DC Rebirth right now. Now, for those of you guys who have been reading DC for some time, you may be familiar with this, but for me, this is relatively new because this is a guy who's just not scared of a giant Frankenstein monster. Now, part of this is because of the fact it's an old guy from the countryside with a shotgun, taking care of his own land. It's that, homegrown American kind of philosophy. But it's also this idea that, with all the stuff that goes on in the DC landscape, people have kind of become not really like immune, but become used to it. They've become used to the fights between, villain and hero. They've become used to these weird organizations that are clandestine just popping out of the woodwork, whisking someone away or somehow fighting Superman. They've grown used to that. They're like, okay, this is just kind of how things are now. Because of this, the old man's got a little bit of strength, but of course Superman shows up and takes Frankenstein out. And so from here, it's really just kind of Lois Lane and the editor crashing into Superman by accident. And again, this is really kind of cool too, because it gives us a little bit of humor. And that's an important thing, I think. I think that's one of the reasons why DC Rebirth is so successful, because what we're getting in these DC Rebirth stories is we're getting hope. Like, DC's saying, hey, look, we've had it dark, we've had it drabby. The New 52 was supposed to be more grounded, more realistic. It was like Marvel's Ultimate Universe, which worked for a time. But as comic book people, and especially in this day and age, and I don't mean to get too philosophical here, but I think this is something that really needs to be pointed out. Comic books were always, by definition, an escape. They were always, by definition, a way for people to break away from the realistic nature of their life, especially if their life was in a position that they didn't like, that they didn't enjoy. If you had a kid who was being picked on all the time, comic books were a way for them to escape that situation. Even if they couldn't, fight off the bullies at school, they could go home, they could read Spider-Man comics, they were getting the girl, they were fighting against the bully, and they were saving the day. They could live vicariously through those characters, and maybe the character of Spider-Man bolstered the confidence of this kid just enough that he stood up to that bully, and that bully left him alone. For some people, it's just their life is total chaos. They have kids running around, and they've got, responsibilities and bills to pay, and mortgages are due, and all kinds of crazy things, and for 10 hours a day, their mind is running at 100 miles an hour. But then they get home and the kids are in bed and, their husband or their wife is asleep. They can put on a cup of decaf coffee or some chamomile tea, and they can read through Superman or Batman. They can literally just let their mind at ease. They can just escape this world and jump into superhero heroics. Especially now in this day and age, when people are struggling the way they are, when the country's going the way it is, a lot of people look out and they don't really see hope. But with DC Rebirth coming along and saying, hey, things are on the upswing. Things are getting better. It's hopeful. It's looking, even if it's only in the realm of comics, looking to the future and saying, there's greatness there. There's greatness that can be achieved. And that's one of the reasons why the pre-New 52 Superman showing up in the New 52 was such an important move and such a brilliant move by DC. As grounded and realistic as the New 52 Superman was, or at least as realistic as you can get when it comes to Superman, but as grounded as he was, as interesting as it was to see a Superman who wasn't really sure of himself, learning more about himself and becoming the Superman that we knew, in the end, we wanted the hopeful Superman. We wanted the Superman where we looked to him and said, that's something to aspire to. When all is lost, when the superheroes are fighting the supervillains and it feels like they're on the edge of destruction, what we want is the Superman who shows up and there's light coming from the back of him and the day is saved. That's the Superman that we want as comic book readers. And that's the Superman that we get. I'm sorry if I'm getting all philosophical and crazy here, but I love that concept in comics. I love the idea of taking characters that are just characters. Superman's, got a weakness to kryptonite, and he can fly really fast, and he can punch really hard. I like the idea of bolstering what's behind him, bolstering the foundation, on which Superman stands, and says he's not just a fictional character that somebody created somewhere. He stands for something. He means something to people. And so because of this, of course, the situation, and with regards to this weird alien guy, Krug, I think is what they were calling him, of course, we learned that that's really what this editor was. It was Krug in disguise, essentially trying to lay low, really, on the planet Earth. And the problem with this is that, between the actions of Frankenstein locating him, between the actions of Superman intervening, there's really no way out here. And so because of this, we're actually introduced to the idea of Frankenstein's bride. Now, Frankenstein's bride showing up is actually a really interesting situation because DC worked this in pretty well. But what they told us, and there's actually a little bit of a refresher that goes on here, but what they told us, is that following this, I guess the escape of Krug, by exploding himself, what we're told is that at one point, Frankenstein and his bride, the bride of Frankenstein really, were trying to procreate. They were trying to have a child and form a family of their own. The result is that their kid basically went insane, became mad with power, and started killing people. And it was really kind of this reversal of situation, this reversal of fortune with Frankenstein's monster, in the sense that Frankenstein himself had to kill his son. And that was one of the cool things behind it, because Frankenstein's monster was Dr. Frankenstein creating a monster he couldn't control. Frankenstein created a son he couldn't control, and it resulted in him having to kill his son. And so because of this, it really created a rift between Frankenstein and his bride, and the two of them ended up going their own separate ways. And so they both live as bounty hunters, and it's kind of like this Mr. and Mrs. Smith situation where they're basically estranged. They don't really like each other. They don't really want to talk to each other. They, or at least she doesn't want to talk to him. But again, like they're bickering, they're debating between the two. Ultimately leads to a well, it really leads to kind of some funny moments, to be honest. While this guy, while Krug is effectively taken out, Frankenstein constantly says, hey, he wants to try to get back together with his wife, or at the very least mend things between the two of them. But as far as she makes it clear, that's not a possibility. Now, of course, what we also learn is that Krug, by virtue of exploding, had kind of bought some time, in the sense that Krug would be able to reconstitute himself, get to his ship, and escape the planet. Problem with this, of course, is that Superman, Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's bride show up and basically prevent this from happening. Again, this is not some super deep story. It's not like it leads into some end of all time, some major crisis event. Instead, it's a really small story. And the reason why Peter Tomasi did this is because the Superman line of comics deal with family. That's the basis behind the Superman comics. On one hand, we have a shattered family. We have a husband and a wife who basically witnessed their own child being killed when the husband had no choice to do it. It drove a rift that they will never be able to mend. On the other hand, you have Superman and you have Lois Lane. And so where, Frankenstein extends the offer of, he and his bride getting back together again and she turns it down, we kind of switch back to the home of Superman and Lois Lane. And it's this idea that they are family, that they come first. Family comes before everything. And that's the coolest thing about this. If it came down to it, if Superman had to choose between Lois and Jonathan or Batman and the Justice League, he would choose Lois and Jonathan every day of the week. Any time of the week, it wouldn't matter. He would set the world on fire if it meant keeping his children safe or keeping his wife and son safe. And that's the cool thing about this. That's what's so great about this, because we can envision a scenario like that, right? We can imagine a situation where Superman literally just takes it to the Justice League and obliterates every last one of them because they intended to take Jonathan prisoner, or they were going to use him for nefarious purposes, or they were going to kill him because they considered him to be too dangerous. Superman would wipe everyone out. He would obliterate life on the planet Earth if it meant keeping his family safe. Now, of course, we know it would never get to that point, but it's cool to see that because what it says is that at its core, at his absolute core, right now in DC Rebirth, Superman is a father first and a superhero second. And that's what I think makes it so cool. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. Again, this is a pretty short video. It's not too huge. The story wasn't meant to be really, really big. It was just an emphasis on family.
Here's something we hope you'll really like.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through his land, Doom's subjects slept soundly in the palm of his hand. A long stocking was hung by the fire with flare, as always alone, though he didn't care. When suddenly, clang, 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 clanged through the air.
My intruder alarm! 'Tis madness, who would dare?
Up to the rooftop, through the castle he sped. Visions of battle danced through his head.
Saint Nick, what are you doing here?
It's my job, Dr. Doom, one evening a year. Now instead of being naughty, would you mind being nice? You can start by prying my head from this vice. Then he turned out from pain, wounded, not dead, and from a red-nosed reindeer came.
Nice going, Tinhead.
Moments later, you know in your heart what you must do. Take my place, Victor. The world is counting on you. Doom pondered and pondered, then asked,
What's in it for me?
I'll grant your heart's desire, no matter what it might be. Soon, Doom appeared once again on his roof, startling the reindeer from antler to hoof.
Prepare yourselves, creatures, away we will zoom. I'm the new monarch of Christmas. I'm Santa Doom. If you're all done laughing, perhaps we can go. Brace yourselves, beasts. I'm using my sled. Thanks for the warning. Go right ahead.
I have no choice. I'm flat on my back. I'm sure he'll do. As the evening wore on, Doom found himself in the States, wondering if he'd be reimbursed for mileage rates. Before he knew it, he wasn't paying attention, Doom lit on the roof of the new Avengers mansion.
I'd better be careful. I'd better beware. Who knows what security measures could be brought to bear? It's Christmas Eve, you loony, no need to pause. They at least knew to expect Santa Claus.
Then he squeezed down the chimney, making a mess of the bricks.
Maybe I should have learned some of St. Nick's size tricks.
Their tree was a beauty. It lit up the room. Can you believe he was speechless? He, Santa Doom?
Can my eyes believe this wondrous sight? Do they really buy gifts for the foes they fight? Now I'm angry. This makes me sore. I've never gotten a gift from the Fantastic Four.
Doom's getting away. What should we do? We'll follow him from afar. We'll keep him in view. He's landing at the fourplex. Should we attack? Let's wait till we see what he has in his sack.
Hey, Cap. Hey, Kazar. Ain't Christmas grand? What can I do to lend you a hand? Speedball, be quiet, you bouncing young pup. Let me give you a hand. Let me help you shut up.
Doom delivered the presents, not making a sound.
Ahem,
came a voice. He slowly turned around.
Reed, Sue, Ben, Johnny, no need to fight. Merry Christmas to all! Ouch, that thing has some right.
They overreacted. He'd committed no crime.
You get the impression that it's clobbering time?
Several miles away, Doom landed in a courtyard. He'd admit he landed quite hard.
Get up, Doom! Don't make us get rough. I tried to be good, but enough is enough!
Doom had it up to here with this Christmas stuff. If no more presents were delivered, that was just tough. In the heat of the battle, it's surprising they heard the sound of a single soft, spoken word.
Santa?
She asked, her eyes bluer than blue.
Why are those heroes beating the tar out of you?
In a moment, the courtyard started to fill, with child after child, all looking quite ill. He looked into the eyes of these brave girls and boys.
These heroes are my helpers to, help pass out toys!
For one magic moment, they were all of one heart. Doom truly enjoyed playing his part. He held her aloft, wanting nothing to harm her, and the child didn't flinch much from his cold, lifeless armor.
I love you, Santa.
She whispered as he held her near. Did the king of Latveria fight back a tear? I'm well enough to leave. Thanks again for your help on Christmas Eve.
Know this, Santa. I have made amends, and even though we may be parting as friends, when next we meet it will be as foes. Nothing will save you, not even your ho-ho-hos.
I'm Santa Claus, silly. I'm no supervillain. This was fun, Victor. We'll have to do it again. Oh, one more thing before I retire. There's still the matter of your heart's desire.
Thank you anyway. It's been taken care of.
Then Santa departed, into the air up above. I gave him no gift. I wonder what he meant.
I'm sure I don't know. That's one twisted jet.
What was his heart's desire? We'll never tell. But suffice it to say, all's well that ends well.